Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee, HSJCC. So, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Zamin Fazal, and I'm a moderator trainer at CMHA Ontario. I'm joined here with my colleague Susan Gibbons, who will also be the moderator, and we will be both moderating this session together. Before we get started, I will review some housekeeping notes, and then I will introduce our speaker for today and begin the session. So just bear with me with a few ground housekeeping rules. I would like you to draw your attention to the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat feature to submit questions. Please type question in all caps letter in the chat before your question, so it is clear for us and easier for us to identify them and find them, and so we can answer to them later. The presenter will be taking questions, but at the end of the session. So we'll keep track of your questions as they come. Also, please ensure your microphone is on mute until the Q&A portion of this session. Also, we will be recording this session to upload to the conference website for future viewing by those who have registered for the conference. You will be able to access the platform for 90 days following the conference. Also, we kindly ask you that to complete a short evaluation at the end of this session to get some of your feedback. It would be very much appreciated, and the feedback will be used to inform future events such as this conference. And lastly, we would like to respectfully ask all of those attending today's session to engage with each other thoughtfully and always consider the impact of your words and interactions on others. As moderators, we will not tolerate abusive or inappropriate behavior, and we will ensure that anyone who engages in such behavior is removed from the session. So now that we have some of these technicalities out of the way, I would like now to introduce our presenter for this session, Mr. Michael Gauthier. He will be covering this. The title of his session is Restoring One's Story, and he's from the Life Circle Consultancy. So Michael, back to you to begin the session.
Thank you very much, Zayam. I just wanted to start off by saying, as Zayam indicated, my name is Michael Gauthier. My biological name is Archibald. My First Nation community is Tegwa Tegamau. A little bit of background in terms of where I ended up in terms of developing our company called Life Circle. It's life-circle.ca if you want to take a look at our website. My business partner, Mark Etche, and I decided to build this company after I finished my PhD in cultural studies from Queen's University. I graduated in 2017, and my professor said to me, Sam McKegney, said to me, well, what are you going to do with it now? What's next? And I was sort of a little bit stressed out about that question because I wasn't sure. And fortunately, I developed this company with my business partner, and then we developed a training tool, and we entitled the training Restoring One's Story. And I'm going to play a video here shortly that explains what Restoring Your Story is about. And also, I want to indicate that prior to, or what I shouldn't say prior to, but while I was completing my PhD, I was also working full-time as an employee of Correctional Service of Canada, where I'm an Indigenous Community Development Officer, helping Indigenous people who are incarcerated in the federal prisons. And one of the things I noticed that a lot of people get stuck in the negative past related to their personal trauma. I did a Master's of Education entitled The Overrepresentation of Aboriginals Caused by the Residential School, Child Welfare, and Intergenerational Trauma back in 2010 at Queen's University. And so this is a build off of my Master's of Education where I completed my PhD. I also have a couple of undergraduate degrees, one in Native Studies from Laurentian, one in Sociology from the University of Prince Edward Island. One of the things I wanted to also share with you is that I completed a youth worker diploma from Holland College in Charlottetown. And it was at that time that I participated in, it was called the Self-Awareness Week. And what that week entailed was where everybody sort of sat around and shared all their ghosts in their closets, all the things that have been bothering them, and they basically shared it with everyone. And I think that was the beginning of my own Restoring Your Story. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. And what I'm going to do now, so you're going to have to bear with me, is I'm going to share with you a video. The video is about 15 minutes long, and the video was actually played at an international positive psychology conference. Believe it or not, it was a couple of summers ago. And so I'm sharing the video, which I talk about restoring one's story. So just bear with me. Give me a moment. I can't see anyone's faces except for Zaim. So I'm hoping that everyone's enjoying this presentation so far.
Thank you for turning on your camera. If only you feel comfortable, let us know if you can't hear the audio or the video, and we will make the adjustment.
There you go, Vanessa. I'm glad that you're brave enough to show your face. There you go. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Gauthier. I'm from Tegwa Tegamau. I was adopted at the age of 8. I lived in several foster homes growing up. My mother was a residential school survivor. She attended Horton Hall Residential School in Moose Factory. I will begin my story by explaining my journey towards my Restoring Your Story. The Restoring Your Story builds from my Master's of Education at Queen's University, which integrated the roles of residential school, the child welfare system, and intergenerational trauma in the incarceration of Indigenous people, a population with access to few cultural relevant resources in the services of healing and empowerment. During this research, I realized that many are stuck telling the same old negative story and no real cultural specific mechanism to become unstuck. I then completed my 5-year PhD cultural studies degree on restoring the lives of Aboriginals at Queen's University here in Kingston. I believe that too many Indigenous people were stuck in the past with respect to telling themselves the same old negative story. Over the last 20 years, I've worked with Correctional Service of Canada as an Indigenous Community Development Officer, and I've witnessed individuals who get stuck in the criminal justice system. Again, their past negative story keeps creeping up, and I believe contributes to them not being able to escape this prison system. My premise entering this project, built from my experience as a Cree scholar who has worked in the criminal justice system and has studied colonialism, was that restoring circles for Indigenous people will begin offering opportunities to contextualize experiences with an unjust colonial history, to deconstruct negative personal narratives, and to enable healing to begin. What is the meaning of restoring? Well, it means to reclaim their voices and piece together identities that have been fragmented by colonial oppression, transform stories of victimhood into stories of resiliency. I define restoring as a practice of changing one eye to see the past differently and hopefully to create a vision of a healthy future. Restoring does not change the bad things that have happened, but allows one to look at those areas and move forward. Restoring also means creating spaces in which Indigenous people can claim their voices and begin to piece together identities that have been fragmented by colonial oppression. The Restoring Circles adopted an approach similar to that of a sharing circle, utilized in many cultural and spiritual ceremonies within Indigenous communities. Remembering, sharing stories, and revitalizing our consciousness in a safe and culturally engaged sharing circle with the support of elders and other Indigenous men might enable the participants to reframe and restore their own histories in a positive way. Elders may highlight that though painful memories are shared, the air can be cleared through a smudge, prayer, and ceremony. By sharing hidden experiences, the participants in the restoring circles can help each other see the relevance of their own life journey and make reinterpretations that can foster healing. The restoring project of developing and consciously evolving one's story is designed to be a lengthy process. One of the aims of restoring is to rediscover, to understand, and to gain interpretive agency over the past. Maybe we can outgrow the stories we've told ourselves. Maybe we could become something different. Perhaps we can even become the true selves that colonialism has denied us. The criteria for attending the restoring circles were A, the ability to revisit and share one's past story, B, the desire to restore one's history, and C, the desire to share one's story in a manner that might foster the healing of one's identity. The restoring circle foreground the agency of participants, foster a sense of community that is often lacking for these individuals, and offer opportunities to imagine alternatives to the stories these men have often heard about themselves. The stories created and shared by the participants offered alternatives to disempowerment and negative consequences, and they proposed a healthier pathway for other Indigenous people. Traumatic experiences common to Indigenous people grappling with ongoing colonization and generations of cultural genocide often persisted within the unspoken territory of silent memories. Such experiences serve to fragment the men's self-perception as well as their own stories. The restoring circles provided the participants with opportunities to open up about difficult memories within a context of community support. Sharing these stories involved opening up and exposing what had been hidden, giving voice to what had been silenced. The restoring circles offered the participants opportunity to express their stories, feelings, and thoughts, and to claim agency over the narrative arc of their life experiences, in some cases for the very first time. Participants no longer needed to exist in isolation and silence, but rather become integral parts of a community based on reciprocity and sharing. Listening to others' stories gave the men the strength and courage to open up about their own previously hidden issues. Now we're going to talk about the medicine wheel, and I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to continue. The medicine wheel teachings and the Tipi are culturally recognizable by a majority of Indigenous people across Canada. The medicine wheel has been used in passing on Indigenous historical written and oral knowledge for centuries. The medicine wheel teaches us to be balanced emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. To be a whole person, according to the teachings of the medicine wheel, is to be alive in a physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual way. The Tipi is a place where storytelling sessions traditionally took place amongst several Indigenous cultures. My own healing journey in restoring process contributed to the evolution of the medicine Tipi wheel model. The medicine wheel Tipi, MWT, model was utilized in the Restoring Circle project to assist the participants in sharing their life stories. Questions are used in each quadrant of the medicine wheel Tipi to prompt reflection in ways that might lead towards positive self-transformation. The phrases, keywords offered in the medicine Tipi wheel are intended to create conversation and lead participants to think differently about their past histories. The change of thoughts patterns will hopefully lead participants to be able to restore their own stories. In addition, the medicine wheel Tipi model is designed to encapsulate Indigenous people's personal statements relating to their life journey and prompt them to think not only about the harm they have suffered, but also what one can do to reverse this harm. The medicine wheel Tipi model was used to assist the participants in remembering their own history. Visualizing through a symbolic art form like the medicine wheel Tipi can create new ways of thinking about one's history that prompt personal creative control. Everyone who uses the medicine wheel will see things slightly differently. This difference is because everyone has their own unique gifts that needed to serve themselves and others. The Restoring Your Story process. This process is to create a safe space for the sharing of personal stories, open up opportunities for reflection, revisiting, and revising stories within a caring community. The restoring circles provide the participants whose lives have been impacted by past trauma. At each of the restoring circles, the participants are invited to share their personal story with the group as they choose. Every session covers a different stage of the participant's life journey, starting with childhood, teenage years, adulthood, elderly, or future goals. There are two medicine wheel Tipi models used in the session. The first medicine Tipi model is used to capture the current story of the participant. The second medicine Tipi model is used for the restoring your story of the participant. See how I flipped it over? First, second, that's how it's going to be used. During the beginning of the restoring circle, the medicine wheel is aligned with the subject matter of the day discussion. Some key words and themes for them to consider are shared. In addition, the participants would be given the handout TP1. The participants are asked to cut this out and transform the handout into a TP. They will notice that the version is two-sided, like I showed you. The second side will be explained later. In Medicine TP1, some keywords, phrases of the quadrants to be shared and referenced are as follows. The keyword phrases that are shared with the participants have been provided by previous participants in other restoring circles. So in other words, I would share already filled out medicine TP wheel model that the people can use while they're sharing their own stories. So in quadrant 1, which is discussion for the very first circle, this would be considered quadrant 1 starting in the east. Everyone gets to discuss, and then we would go to quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and then quadrant 4. Quadrant 1, which is again the east, childhood and emotions, key words that have been shared by other participants are unhealthy, poverty, hunger, lack of parenting, role models, lack of education. Some of the phrases that other participants have said is they felt dirty and awful, they didn't fit in, they were left alone, they were beaten up, loss of family members. Some of the questions you would ask yourself to share your own story is describe your childhood, who raised you, describe your living situation, were you always with people or were you alone? And then we move on to quadrant 2, which is the south of the medicine TP wheel. This is adolescence and mental health. Again, keywords are shared, which are negative peers, suicidal thoughts, lack of trust. Some phrases are, when I see my own blood, feel like I'm releasing the pain. I won't do that again, I promise. Some of the questions are, who were your role models? How were you treated by others? Quadrant 3 is in the west, and that's adulthood and physical. Key words are past mistakes, change of heart. Some phrases is, I treat people like they treat me. Most times it wasn't pretty. Lose-lose situation. Some of the questions are, did you use drugs, alcohol? What kinds of jobs have you held? Have you had a partner? Did you ever get in trouble with the law? Quadrant 4, which is the north, and it's the white, elder years and spiritual. Some of the key words are elderly, spirituality. Some of the phrases are, when things get tough, pray. It is so easy yet so hard. Some of the questions are, describe your experience and exposure to cultural and spiritual activities. Do you have hope for your future? So at this point, once everyone's done sharing their story, which is TP Wheel 1, we would often have an elder come in to smudge to release the negative energy and to start the path to a healthier place. So now we would get the individuals, the next circle, to flip over their medicine TP wheel and talk about restoring your story. This is the beginning of another restoring circle. To start the process, the participants are asked to take TP1, which would be this side, undo it and turn it inside out, creating TP2. So you would just flip it around. You can reflect on keywords, phrases you wrote on TP1 in order for you to restore your story for TP2. So TP1, your initial story, TP2, restoring your story. Remember, TP1 is not who you are, it is who you have become. You must rise above it, as you can never completely get rid of it. You can use it to make you stronger to move forward. Each participant will now be asked to repeat the previous exercise we completed on TP1 with a new, healthier focus on TP2 or restoring your story. So again, they would start in the East Quadrant 1 in childhood and emotions. And some of the key words, positive keywords that have been shared by other participants are belief in higher power, smudging. Some of the questions are, what positive memories do you have of your childhood? Who loved you? What was your favorite place? And then we would move down to Quadrant 2, which is the self, adolescent and mental health. Again, keywords, positive self-image, self-esteem. Some of the questions is, what positive memories do you have of your teen years? Who helped you survive? Whom did you help? Quadrant 3 would be going into the West, adulthood and physical. Keywords are taking care of yourself, proper exercise. What lessons have you learned? Are you learning? How have you survived? What are your gifts and abilities? And in the North is elder spiritual years. Again, some of the keywords are quality family time, learning from elders. Some of the questions are important. What teachings are important to learn and include in your life? The medicine wheel TP and restoring your story is a start of a healing journey in order to overcome the pain of the past and live today for today. Upon completion of my PhD, I had a conversation with Rolanda, Executive Director of Rainbow Lodge Treatment Center in Wikwimikong First Nation. She was the main driver of having myself and business partner Mark Etche of Life Circle offer Restoring Your Story training manual to her staff at the lodge. This training was offered on a couple of occasions to Rainbow Lodge, including Native Horizons Treatment Center, where Rolanda organized and invited them to participate. The main purpose of creating this healing method was to help others overcome their past negative story. So I was quite interested in offering training to her staff members. Actually, this training only proved how instrumental and important the Restoring Your Story is to help individuals overcome their past trauma. So I just wanted to show that video. That again, I completed that video. I think it was 3 summers ago. Again, for the workshop, was entitled Positive Psychology. But I think about 3 years ago seems like a long time ago. But we've done a lot more training in terms of restoring one's story to several other organizations since that presentation took place. So now what I'd like to do is share a PowerPoint presentation to finish off the rest of my talk today. So bear with me 1 second, please. So again, this is the conference Striving for Inclusive Justice. The agenda that I created was just something I figured that hopefully we can address in my 1 hour, but introductions, which I've done, some of the workshop goals, understanding trauma, the medicine Tipi wheel, also talk about, which I have already in my video, the MTW, or I also reference MWT, both 1 and 2, restoring and balance, having a balance in terms of one's life, as well as feeling healthy and creating a healthy path forward. Bear with me 1 second. I see a bit of my screen, but I also see all the participants. I'm trying to correct that. Let me see. Okay. So I already introduced myself. There's a better picture of myself. Some of the workshop goals for today's presentation is I explained my journey to restoring one's story. In my video, I provided an understanding of the medicine Tipi wheel, restoring your story methodology. One of the things that we speak about in our training is you got to understand the person's trauma related to their own situation and why they're stuck in their sort of negative narrative in their own brain in terms of the volume, the negative volume. And I talk about the historical factors. When I reference historical factors, what I'm talking about is the residential school, the impact of the residential school, the impact of the child welfare system. And what I realized and what I feel that a lot of people are struggling with is intergenerational trauma created by those two negative systems of the residential school and child welfare. And again, what this ties into is 6 layers of isolation, which I'll explain later. So one of the exercises like that we'd like to do in terms of when we meet with individuals and organizations is we want to see how the residential school, how the child welfare system, how the intergenerational trauma have impacted both themselves and their clients. And it's a neat exercise, and we usually do this as a group exercise, and it's good to talk about these systems, but also to put these systems and the descriptions of these systems up on the flip chart. And then we have a discussion about how they've impacted the client and themselves. And most importantly, how they impact their own story. So this what would they call it? This diagram or illustration was a result of when I completed my Master's of Education. And as you can see, I had 60 scoop residential school, child welfare, which equates into intergenerational trauma, and that equals 6 layers of isolation. But when you look at this, you can also look at other negative contributors such as poverty, such as unemployment, such as drug abuse, alcohol abuse, violence. You can put any sort of negative factors that all stem or all have some form of connection related to the residential school or child welfare or 60 school. So I know that you might have some extra time tonight. That's if you're not watching Survivor. But tonight, if you have an opportunity, I talk about the 6 layers of isolation in my PhD. And the reason why I created the 6 layers of isolation was I kept being asked by people that weren't involved or didn't work in the criminal justice system, why do people keep going back to prison? Why can't they just get a job and become a, quote, normal person in society? And so to explain it and to answer that question, I came up with 6 layers of isolation. And the first layer is those people that are impacted negatively by the residential school, child welfare system, they come from a very unstable family background where either mom and dad are dealing with their own demons of the past and are suffering from substance abuse. They're living in a very volatile, poverty-stricken home. And so they don't feel safe. Their own personal safety at home, they don't feel that. And so these individuals now have to sort of escape or live on the streets or hang out in the parks where they feel all alone and they feel lonely and a sense of solitude, and not a good sense of solitude, but a negative sense of solitude. And that negative sense of solitude is the second layer of isolation. And the third layer of isolation is feeling shameful and guilty of their situation, of not being able to talk about the violence or the poverty or mom and dad having to go to jail or relatives coming over and getting into fights. They feel very guilty about not being able to talk about their situation, but also shameful of their situation. And so that's the third layer of isolation. The fourth layer is substance abuse. At a young age, these individuals, they get introduced to substance abuse because where they're hanging out with other individuals that maybe traveled that same negative path as them. But then you get older teenagers that say, hey, why don't you have a drink? Why don't you smoke some drugs? Because it'll take away your pain just for a moment. So they do. And then what happens is, unfortunately, some of them become addicted. And so that's the fourth layer of isolation. The fifth layer of isolation is where those individuals are now labeled by society as whether they're criminals, whether they're bullies, troublemakers. And the reason why they get labeled by society and become involved as a criminal is because substance abuse and to buy the drugs and alcohol, it's not free. And so they're not getting it from mom and dad. So they have to, unfortunately, either break and enter, they have to steal, and then they become labeled by society in terms of involved in the criminal justice system, and they're placed on probation. And we all know after probation, they get sentenced to a group home. And then from a group home, they go into a young offender center, whether it's opened or closed. And then from there, they go into the provincial custody, provincial jail. And then from there, they become a federal inmate. And so what I discovered is that these people, when you look at their lifestyle and you look at their story, they become superior recruits for incarceration. And then the last layer of isolation I talk about is disconnection. And when I talk about disconnection, I talk about disconnection of you don't know who you are. You're disconnected from yourself. You're disconnected from your family. You're disconnected from your community. And so that's one of the things in terms of the last layer of isolation. And you'll notice the arrow is going up. And what we unfortunately find is that arrow continues. It comes circling back around. But ideally, if people have an opportunity to maybe restory their story, that arrow sort of goes into a more healthier direction in terms of healing, in terms of reconnection to culture. So that's my 6 layers of isolation. So one of the other things we want to do is we want to change the narrative. We want to change the narrative of individuals caught within the criminal justice system, impacted by colonialism. And how we do that is we look at how do we change the negative role models that these individuals meet on the inside? And when I say on the inside, I'm talking about the young offenders, the provincial jail, federal jail. And how do we go from that into more positive role models? I have a picture of Adam Beach, in case some of you are wondering who that is. He's a popular actor, and he's one of the positive role models. Believe it or not, he actually came to my community to speak to some of the youth. And also, I mentioned earlier on that we've got to get disconnected from substance abuse, disconnected from incarceration, and more connected into one's culture, and more connected into treatment, more connected into spirituality, such as restoring circles, powwows, sweat lodge. I have a story I'd like to share with you. I'm looking at the time as well, where I had a participant talk to me and speak to me about his father, and he described how he looked at his father in a positive way, but when he saw his father beat up his mother, he described his father's negative act with the use of colors. His father was using the color representing white as in a healthy, positive role model. But when he saw his father beat up his mother, that color went from white to gray to black. And unfortunately, because of the negative role modeling he saw his father do to his mother, that individual did do federal time for domestic abuse. However, he's now in an opportunity to change that color of black to gray to white, and that's what he's doing. And now I believe he's got a son, and he has an opportunity to not be a negative role model, but a positive role model. I don't know if some of you have heard about an eagle story, but the eagle story, I share the eagle story just basically describing what could happen to people who are caught in a negative environment. So there was an eagle soaring high in the sky. He was bringing all the prayers to the Creator. These hunters shot and wounded him. He fell in the ditch. The farmer came out and put him in the chicken coop with all the other chickens. There was a fence around the chicken coop. This eagle, he could fly and leave any time. The farmer took care of him. He even said to the eagle, anytime you can leave, because that's not where you belong in the chicken coop. So one day, this big Anishinaabe person came and he asked the farmer if he could have a drink of water. The farmer said, sure. And when he did, the Indigenous man or lady looked and saw this eagle pecking in the dirt like a chicken. The Indigenous person said to the farmer, I'll take that eagle off your hands if you want. The farmer said, take him. That's one less mouth to feed. The eagle was placed under the Indigenous man's arm. He was telling the eagle what a magnificent bird he was, and he didn't belong with all those other chickens. The eagle lost his identity and became a chicken. That Anishinaabe person took the eagle to the highest mountain, and he said, I'm going to throw you off of here. I want you to soar and bring all those prayers from the Anishinaabe people to the Creator. Talk to the Creator about all the help we need down here, about the alcohol, the drugs, the poverty, the violence that are happening with our Indigenous people. The eagle went up in the air, but soon he hit the ground and started to peck and scratch like a chicken. The Indigenous person took him back up again and kept telling him over and over what a magnificent bird he was, the gifts that he carried, and that he was so valuable to the Indigenous people. He threw him over and over again, but the eagle would not fly. Eventually, the eagle started to soar because he was loved and people cared for him, and they wanted to see him move in a good part of his life. He came to this earth as a young baby full of gifts, love, and kindness. He lost it all when he was pecking around with the chickens. The story is to help Indigenous people believe in themselves and to recognize the many strengths they all possess. As a child, everyone has gifts. These gifts can be lost when we forget who we are. getting lost due to our past histories of pain and trauma, which can obscure our identities. Eventually, we begin to reclaim our identities and find our strengths to heal from the past. Healing can be a difficult but rewarding journey and requires a long-term commitment. Once personal healing begins, one's eyes are often open to opportunities to help others trapped in the negative situation, such as a chicken coop. And the reason why I share that story about the eagle is so many of us have gifts, but we don't know that because we don't have the right opportunities to sort of shine and develop those gifts, because we're trapped, whether it's caused by the residential school, child welfare, but we're trapped within our own sort of criminal justice system, whether it's physically or subconsciously in our own negative narrative. So again, I talked about a medicine Tipi wheel, and that Tipi that you see on screen right there, that's actually a Tipi that I helped an elder, Jim Johnson, build in the Kingston Penitentiary grounds, which was a couple of years ago. And there's my model. I know I showed it earlier, but there's my model that we use in some of our training. And as I mentioned in the video, those are some of the directions. And there's other directions, other words that are used. It depends on whether you're from Western Canada or Eastern Canada or here in Central Canada. I already explained what is restoring your story. But for me, restoring your story is everyone wants that sense of balance when we get up in the morning. And sometimes the stories, the negative stories that we tell each other or tell yourself tends to not give you that sense of balance. And so I believe, and I know that we've done so many training sessions, restoring your story is just another tool that will help you hopefully feel a sense of balance when you wake up in the morning. So I talked about in my video as well, when we start in the East, when we get people to talk about TP1 and share us your story. And so those are some of the things that we talk about. And then we go to the South. There's some questions that we ask. There's some comments that are made by past participants. And you'll notice that we have like the age group. And the reason why we have the age group is usually in the East, we ask, tell us about your childhood. And then we move to the South, tell us about your teenage years or your adolescence. And in the West, we ask you, tell us about your young adult years. And then obviously in the North, we ask you, what's going on now? What's your future look like? So again, this is the North. And if you notice, our symbol of life circles moved into that direction. So again, some of the bullet points about restoring your story, you symbolically, the unhealthy past is now overtaken by the healthy present and future. Understanding the past can help us move forward. I remember one of our trainings, one of the ladies, she came to me, she was about 50 some years old, and she goes, I've been stuck for so many years in my negativity, and you helped me to become unstuck. And when she said, you helped me, I think this medicine Tipi wheel, restoring your story, is only as useful as the user. So if the user is willing to open up and talk about that emotional baggage or those ghosts in the closet, then it'll be more effective. But if they're not willing to sort of pick up and use the tool, it's not going to work. It's only as good as the person that is willing to use it. it's one of those things that I share in my training. I don't have time for it today, but I share Mike's story. And the reason why I share Mike's story is I talk about when little Mike was involved in the foster homes, and when little Mike was given up for adoption and became a 60 scoop product of the 60 scoop. When little Mike went through all the violence and unhealthy actions caused by parents and adopted parents who were supposed to take care of him, they didn't do their job. And I talk about how little Mike plays the part in Big Mike's life, but then Big Mike started restoring his story and how he was able to turn down the negative volume in little Mike's head and take care of little Mike, because little Mike was never taken care of. And so many years, Big Mike's life never really had a childhood. And that's because he always had to take care of everyone else, as opposed to enjoying those opportunities that people are supposed to enjoy while growing up. And as you can notice there, restoring is a never-ending process, because life is not always going to be good. Life is about, unfortunately, negative things happening, but they're also about positive, more healthier things happening. And it's how are you going to handle those situations? And I think if you're able to look at the past in a good way, say, what can I learn from it? As opposed to what beats me down? What keeps me down? It's one of those things. It's up to you to decide how you look at your past and how do you restore your story to make it work for you today. So one of the things, and the reason why we share Mike's story, is when we get the individuals to come back to restore their story, because now they've already shared their negative story, but now we want to look at how can we restore that negative story into a more healthier story. And so that's what we do. And some of the words that we captured from people is they always had maybe some positive peers to rely on. They maybe had some teacher that offered some kind words, and that they were able to trust individuals even though distrust was a huge part in their life. And again, the same with the self. We looked at their story, their negative story in the self, like I mentioned earlier, and we got them to restore that. And in the West, the same thing. And in the North, we did the final part of restoring their story. But the challenge is a lot of people that we work with, whether it was mental health workers, social workers, police officers, they struggle in this part. How do I restore my story? And the challenge is for you to really work on that, because sometimes it's not easy. It's easy for us to describe the past in a negative manner because we're so used to it. But when we're asked to sort of, how do you restore that? It's more of a challenge. So we want to reinforce the path forward. And again, like I mentioned, you want to acknowledge your past, but you also want to live today for today. And hopefully you have a sense of a hope for the future. I like this picture. This is one of our training sessions. And like I mentioned earlier, we went up to Wikwimicon with Rainbow Lodge, and we offered Restoring Your Story. And these were just some comments that we captured from that one particular session. And a lot of these people, all of them are workers that are there to help other individuals sort of deal with their past trauma. So I have final thoughts. That's our website, like I've already indicated. I don't know, Zamim, if there's questions or what you want to do at this point. Let me stop sharing this.
Yeah, for sure. We have about 10 minutes left in the session. We haven't had any questions posted in the chat room, but we can open up the space now to people if they want to take the mic or post in the chat room any questions they may have for Michael.
I'm wondering, because I did such a good job, no one has any questions. I covered all the bases.
We're getting some heart shapes, so it means they like your story, Michael. Any questions for Michael about the medicine wheel or the story itself? How to rewrite the narrative?
Oh, Danielle has a question.
Hi, thank you. Is it okay if I ask it like this?
Oh yeah, for sure.
All right, perfect. Thank you. I really appreciated hearing your story, and I think that this medicine wheel teepee that you've developed is really relevant. I work with a large Indigenous population here in Thunder Bay, and I think this would really resonate very well, especially the idea of restoring their story, because you're right, people tend to get stuck in the negatives of their experiences. I haven't explored your website yet, but the training that you deliver for delivering this kind of restoring your story, is it something that can be delivered, I guess, by non-Indigenous people, or would that have less of an impact, or how would you see that as someone who is not Indigenous delivering a very culturally centric kind of a tool?
Well, it's funny you say that, because we were just in last October, we were in Homebridge Youth Society, which is a group home in Nova Scotia. Primarily, majority of their 200 and some plus group home workers were non-Indigenous, but they were working with Indigenous clients. And really, I mean, the medicine wheel is supposed to capture all races of life and include everyone. And again, it is about the tool, but it's more about the journey. And so the focus is to get people to open up and share their story. And the medicine wheel teepee model helps, it assists those people to do that. And one of the things, like we offered it to the city of Kingston, the social service department, and there was no issues about Indigenous or non-Indigenous. So I think it works for everyone, if that answers your question.
That does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We do have some questions in the chat room as we were concluding. Someone's asking, thanks for sharing the story. What is the referral process for someone is working with someone who would benefit from life cycle? So what is the referral process?
Well, the referral process is you can get a hold of us at our website. We have our contact information there. And believe it or not, I'm a phone guy. So if you picked up the phone and called me directly, you can do that. My daughter thinks no one phones anymore. It's always text. So yeah, if you want to reach out to myself or my business partner, we can set something up in terms of assisting individuals or groups.
Thank you, Michael. I'm also a phone person. I'm still having a hard time getting used to thousands of texts received. Another great question we have related to traumatizing. So so thanks for sharing the tool. And are there any specific steps you take to protect against possible re-traumatizing while a person tells their original story?
And it's funny, I just literally just met with the executive director of the Mi'kmaq Native Friendship Center in Halifax this morning. And she says, well, what happens when people spill the beans about their emotional abuse of the past? Like, how do you guys handle that? And it's one of those things that I always sense that whatever organization you come from, you obviously have a resource of people already in place to sort of hopefully be there in case individuals need to lean on that. But one of the things we do is when we create the restoring circles, we have an elder there or a spiritual advisor that does an opening and offers a smudge. That's one thing. But also the other thing is, like, everyone in the circle is there for the very same reason. And hopefully that's to restore their story. And so hopefully they're prepared to open up the ghost of their closet, maybe share some, maybe share a lot. And again, I think this tool is really good for your clients, because if your client opens up the ghost of their closet and only shares a few things, but you know a lot more is going on, it'll give you an indication where that person is at with their healing. And I think it's important that we have elders that we work with in the community that are part of our committee, Life Circle committee, that if people reach out to us, we can refer them to them. Also, like in terms of my own experience, both personally and professionally, I think we can help people sort of navigate what's going on with their situation. But more importantly, when we're done our Restoring Your Story in terms of sharing the unhealthy past, we do a check-in. We all do another check-in to make sure everyone's okay before they leave. So we want to make sure no one walks away not feeling like, I just did this, I spilt the beans, but no one really cares. We want to make sure everyone's good after they check out of the circle. And I think we're all working professionals and we all know that, but it's important that we do that anyways.
Thank you, Michael, for answering this question. Last question we would have taken for this session. Definitely doing the restoring in a safe environment, having people around who can support with this. It's great. So please join me, everyone, for thanking Michael Gauthier for being here today for this great presentation and for sharing his knowledge with us. Please take a few moments to complete the evaluation. The link is found in the chat room and on the session page at the bottom of the page. Your feedback would be very much appreciated. Thank you to Michael and everyone for your participation and for all these great insightful questions. Please join us in the plenary room for our day one closing remarks. And yeah, that's on this note, thank you for joining us, and I will end the session here. You're free to go for the rest of the evening. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your day.